Greetings and welcome to Sports 101, the show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. Here we like to expand our conversation and include history, the past, present, as well as in the making, and we also look at the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on social media, on Twitter at Coach_Harp412 and Facebook under Jamar Harp. Make sure you get social with Sports 101 and a litany of other shows on SportsZone Chicago by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. You can find SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram under SportsZone Chicago. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is a sports talk app. You can watch and listen to my show as well as the plethora of other shows on SportsZone Chicago. Keep up with your favorite teams and breaking sports news. If you miss something, don't worry about it. Go to YouTube and just search SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to the channel. But most importantly, we need everyone to download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found in the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Now I would like to talk to you about this week's episode, which is titled Russia's Invasion and the Politics of Sport. Okay. So everyone has been talking about this invasion that's going on. So I just want to break it down and give you a little insight of it. I'm referring to Russia and the Ukraine, as well as give some sports significance. So Russia and Ukraine are two countries that border each other in Eastern Europe. On February 24th, 2022, Russia sent its army into Ukraine and began trying to take over the country by force. This invasion surprised many people as it was the first major war in Europe in over decades. Both countries, however, can trace their beginnings to the same middle of the kingdom called Kievan Rus. If anybody watches the show Vikings and next to the last season, they had a historical depiction of that, with Ivar ending up in Russia with the ruling family, and there was a skirmish in regards to that. Let's look at this pic right here. The Rus Vikings, which are showed in this pic right here, and one of their groups, a Varian Guard, was founded in the 800s by a group of Vikings, the Varangians, who came from Northern Europe to rule over the local people. Kiev Rus spanned what is now Russia and the Ukraine, and its people, the Slavs, are the ancestors of today's Russians and Ukrainians. So today's Russians and Ukrainians are all Slavic people. The capital of the city of Kiev was called Kiev, the same Kiev that is now the capital of Ukraine. So at one point, Ukraine was the capital of Kiev Rus, or Russia. Moscow, which is now today's capital of Russia, was also a part of Kiev Rus. The Kievan Rus Empire was conquered by Genghis Khan and his Mughal armies from the Asian plateau in around 1240, and they began to split up. Kiev became part of a new commonwealth that spanned today's Poland and Ukraine. Moscow became a local capital of the Mongol Empire, and both Moscow and Kiev were at the crossroads between Asia and Europe, but with different cultures based on their geography. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about Imperial Russia and the Soviet Union. In the 1500s, descendants of the Kiev Rus, princes in Moscow, formed an empire of their own, which was known as Imperial Russia. By 1654, it included Kiev and its Ukrainian people, along with other lands of people from Europe and Asia. In Imperial Russia, some saw Ukrainians as brothers to the Russians because they shared a culture dating back till medieval times. There were also some Ukrainians that said that while both groups practiced the same religion and shared history, Ukrainian culture, such as its food, language, art, and music, were a little bit different than Russia. A revolution in February of 1917 forced Russia's leader, Tsar Nicholas II, from the throne. Another revolution that same year created a new empire called the Soviet Union. So just to give you a brief history, we want to watch a quick video on the Tsar Nicholas II and his removal from the throne.
The Russian Revolution. The year is 1914. World War I had begun, and Russia was at war with Germany. The working class and the peasants make up the Russian army. However, they are not well equipped or trained for the battles to come. The year is now 1917. Millions of Russians had been either killed or wounded. The Russian people were angry at Tsar Nicholas II for getting Russia into the war, and several other reasons, including the Tsar taking personal command of the army, Rasputin's power over the royal family, food shortages, and growing political opposition. The first revolution came about in February 1917 on the Julian calendar in Petrograd, which was the capital of Imperial Russia. Demonstrators protested about the lack of bread due to rationing and were soon joined by striking workers. The army was called upon to suppress the uprising. Several protesters were shot and killed by the soldiers. However, many refused to open fire. The army, too, it seemed, had mutinied against the Tsar. The Petrograd Soviet was the city council for workers and soldiers. Now, more and more workers and soldiers elected people to it in order to represent their demands. The Tsar abdicated, bringing an end to the Tsarist autocracy, and a new government took over. This government was run by two political parties, the Petrograd Soviet and the Provisional Government. The Bolshevik Revolution. The Provisional Government was also unpopular. It made the decision to remain in the war and failed to give land to the peasants. Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks were a faction of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party and eventually became the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He had a simple slogan which would appeal to the people and the Petrograd Soviet: peace, bread, and land. Peace, the end of Russia's involvement in World War I. Bread, solving food shortages, and land, which would go to the peasants. He also stated all power to the Soviets, meaning that he would seize power in the name of the Soviet. On November 6 and 7, 1917, or October 24 and 25 on the Julian calendar, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, launched a coup d'etat against the Provisional Government. They stormed the Winter Palace and arrested the Provisional Government, putting themselves in charge of Russia's government. After the revolution, the Bolshevik government exited the war by signing a peace treaty with Germany called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. A civil war would erupt in 1918 by those who were against the new Bolshevik government, the White Army, and the Bolsheviks themselves, the Red Army. Subscribe to see more history videos. Get Simple History, The Russian Revolution, and Simple History, World War I, out today.
Thank you. Now, even after the Bolshevik Revolution, some Ukrainians did not want to join the new Soviet Empire and still tried to form their own country. The Soviets defeated this movement and created the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic instead, one of the many republics they created that made up the entire Soviet Union. At first, it allowed Ukrainians to keep their culture and run their local government, but when the Soviets began to fear that the Ukrainians wanted independence, they took that power away. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine and Russia, which had both been a part of the Soviet Union, both became independent countries at that time. If you fast forward now to 2013, Ukraine's president, Viktor Yanukovych, wanted Ukraine to be loyal to Russia. So he decided to not sign a trade agreement to bring Ukraine closer to Europe or Western Europe, also known as NATO, which is the NATO affiliated countries. Many Ukrainians protested. They kicked Yanukovych out of office and elected a government that favored Western Europe rather than Russia. A lot of people say this was also a part with the Western governments playing a role in this coup d'etat. Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed that despite these protests, most Ukrainians still did want ties with Mother Russia. Putin also worried that Ukraine would join a military alliance with the United States and the Western Europe and will be a threat to Russia if Ukraine joined NATO. In 2014, Russia took over an area in southern Ukraine called Crimea, and that's by the sea. There's a lot of oil in that water on that coast. There was a lot of economic reasons when they want to take that over. And then when you look at military strategy, you want to control ports. So having an army down there could prevent them from attack, as they will have to go through Ukraine first before they got to Russia. In 2014, they also sent soldiers and weapons, the Western governments, to Eastern Ukraine, claiming to help people who wanted to be a part of Russia. And Russia would send information, soldiers, and things as well, for send ammunitions for people that wanted to be a part of the West. So there was a duality in Ukraine. In the 8 years since then, about 14,000 people died and 1 million people fled to escape the fighting. Again, it was being promoted on both sides by Russia and the West, henceforth so many deaths. In February of 2022, Putin again claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are all one people. He said he sees Ukrainians and Russians as brother nations and says that because Russia is the older brother, it should get to be in charge. Of course, most Ukrainians disagree to this, and they have been inspired by the words of their president, Volodymyr Zelensky. He told Putin that Ukrainians want peace, but that if they need to, they will defend their country's independence. Putin invaded, obviously, and at this time, he's planning to take over the entire country. Ukrainians are currently now fighting the Russian army, trying to defeat what they say is an occupation, while the Russians look at it as a civil war per se, similar to what the United States went through, where one portion of the country wants to succeed and they want to annex it back in. In Russia, the people had no say-so about whether they invaded, and many people are protesting against it because they feel like money can be spent otherwise within the nation. Many families also have both Russian and Ukrainian family members. If you look at the Israel-Palestinian conflict, people on both sides, families on both sides, the Civil War, Hatfields and McCoys, Kentucky, West Virginia. And because of these reasons, a lot of people on both sides of the border do not want to fight a war against their brothers. The United States and much of Europe are on the side of the Ukrainians, as they believe Ukraine should be able to decide its own future. The United States and NATO, which again is Western Europe, send guns, troops, and other support to unofficially help Ukraine in its essential civil war. This is another reason Putin wants to invade and reclaim Ukraine, as he feels like it's a buffer state between Russia and the West, aka NATO. Ukraine also has vast oil reserves to give Russia an advantage, as they sell majority of its oil to Western Europe. And if Ukraine is under Western Europe, they can cut off Russia's supply and ally together against Putin and Russia, and Ukraine will sell out of oil and they won't have to go to the Russian government. So we're going to take a quick video announcement right here, and we're just going to discuss our podcast as well as give shout outs to our mother station. So again, I am Jamar Harp, and this is Sports 101, the show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. Here, we're going to talk about sport from a people, places, and cultural perspective through the lens of history in the past, present, as well as in the making. Please get social with SportsZone Chicago and a litany of other shows by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. Again, you can find SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, please download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found on the Google, iTunes, and Amazon Play Store. Now, thank you for that quick announcement. Now, before the break, we talked a little bit about the conflict and how Russia and Ukraine are related and some historical basis behind this invasion by Russia. Now, I want to talk about the politics and sport that go with that and the Russians that were affected since this invasion. This picture right here is Roman Abramovich. He was the former owner of Chelsea, and he'll be the highlighted segment for the rest of this episode. Again, one side effect of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the proposed sale of London's Chelsea Football Club, one of the most storied franchises in the world's most popular sport, which is football. We call it soccer in the States. So to give you a little bit about Roman Abramovich, He is a Jewish Russian billionaire, oligarch, and politician. So just to give you a quick definition of what an oligarch is, Russian oligarchs are pretty much business moguls of the former Soviet Union who rapidly accumulated wealth during the era of the Russian privatization and the aftermath of when the Soviet Union was disbanded in the 1990s. So what happened in the 90s was the failing Soviet state, they left the ownership of state assets contested, which allowed for informal deals with former USSR officials that mostly lived in Russia and the Ukraine as a means to acquire state property. The first modern Russian oligarchs emerged as business sector entrepreneurs under Mikhail Gorbachev's. He was a general secretary of the Soviet Union from 1985 to 91 during his period of market liberalization. These younger generation of entrepreneurs were able to build their initial wealth because Gorbachev's reforms effected a period when coexistence of regulated and quasi-market prices created huge opportunities for arbitrage. And arbitrage is the practice of taking advantage of a difference in prices in two or more markets. So going back to our term oligarch, as most people aren't familiar with that, that term derives from the ancient Greek word oligarchia, which means the rule of a few. So remember, since 2017, there's been several Russian oligarchs and their companies have been hit by U.S. sanctions under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CATSA, for their support of the Russian government and malign activity around the world. So basically, it's still a version of the Cold War where Russia is sending people out to different countries to align with their interests, and the West is doing it as well. However, the West often tries to sanction Russia, and they're doing the same thing. So basically politics. So a little bit, again, about Roman Abramovich's family. And like most Russians, Abramovich's grandparents are both Russian. However, they hail from Ukraine. And again, that shows the interweaving of both countries as they were once one. Abramovich enriched himself in the years following the collapse of the Soviet Union, obtaining Russian state-owned assets at prices far below market value in Russia's controversial loans for share privatization program. Now, you heard me say multiple times, state assets. So what are these state assets that people are buying so low at below market prices and selling to become multi-billionaires? You guessed it, military-grade weapons and technology. If you look at, remember the movies of the 90s, it was always some secrets coming from Russia that were being sold to someone else to make something to destroy the West. And that thought process was valid as, again, the Russian oligarchs, they would go in, and let's say it was a couple missiles. I could buy them below their value, sell them on the black market, sell them to someone in Ukraine, sell them to someone else in Russia, or anyone in the other Eastern Bloc countries that separated from the USSR. So again, that's how a lot of these billionaire oligarchs made their money. Abramovich was a confidant of former Russian President Boris Yeltsin and the current Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Abramovich was also the first person to recommend to former President Yeltsin that Vladimir Putin be his successor as the Russian president. So you can see pictures right here of both of them relaxing together, spending time. It's really a father-son relationship. Here's another picture of the President Putin and Abramovich kicking it. Again, just showing their close friendship. When Putin formed his first cabinet as prime minister, he was prime minister before president in 1999. Abramovich interviewed each of the candidates for cabinet positions before they were approved. Chris Hutchins, the biographer of Putin, described the relationship between the Russian president and Abramovich as like that between a father and a favorite son. Abramovich is a primary owner of the private investment company Millhouse LLC and is best known outside of Russia as the owner of Chelsea, a Premier League football club. In June of 2003, Abramovich became the owner of the companies that control Chelsea Football Club in West London. Upon his buying of the team, Chelsea immediately embarked on an ambitious program of commercial development with the aim of making it a worldwide brand on par with other football dynasties, such as Manchester United, who operated out of North London in the city of Manchester, and Real Madrid out of Madrid, Spain. He also announced plans to build a new state-of-the-art training complex in Surrey, which is very close to Chelsea. Here are some pics of some of the wins that they got, cups and trophies during his tenure. And I like to give you some stats on those. Since Abramovich took over the club, Chelsea has won 18 major trophies, the UEFA Champions League twice, the UEFA Europa League twice, the UEFA Super Cup twice, the Premier League 5 times, the FA Cup 5 times, with 2010 providing the club's first ever league and FA Cup double, and the League Cup 3 times. This makes Chelsea the most successful English trophy-winning team during Abramovich's ownership, equaling what Manchester United did, who also won 16 major trophies in this time span. Detractors have also called the team, instead of Chelsea, they call it Czechsky, referring to the new Chelsea under Abramovich and highlighting the phenomenon of billionaires buying English football clubs and purchasing trophies by using their personal wealth to buy as many marquee players as possible. A lot of people say that distorts the league and particularly the transfer market. This has recently been done again by the investment group that bought Newcastle United from Saudi Arabia, run by members of the royal family. So this trend is going to continue. In 2021, Abramovich was criticized for trying to enter Chelsea in an unpopular European Super League. Now, the European Super League was going to be a league where some teams broke away from La Liga, which is the professional league in Spain, as well as the English Premier League, and formed their own Super League with the top teams playing each other. The competition had been widely scrutinized for encouraging greediness among the richer, larger football clubs, and they also scrutinized for undermining the significance of existing football competitions and English football as a whole. However, just 2 days later, after the public outrage, Abramovich decided to pull the club off the new competition and encourage other English teams to follow suit and just stay in the Premier League. When owner Roman Abramovich bought the club for around £150 million or $197 million in 2003, it had won the biggest honor in the English game, the league title or Premier League championship, since 1955. Since he arrived and spent millions on top players, coaches, training facilities, Chelsea has won 21 trophies, including 5 league titles, prompting their fans to saying, "We won it all." However, we know in the English soccer culture, which singing is very prevalent, this gives opposing fans the right to sing that you've bought it all instead of you won it all. So why would he have to sell Chelsea? Russian billionaires since this invasion are being hit with economic sanctions as part of the global condemnation of the military invasion of Ukraine. Abramovich, who's worth about $13.6 billion, including the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, has not been sanctioned so far. However, that could change in the near future. Either way, he's still facing scrutiny over his ties to Russia and his president, Vladimir Putin, who refers to him as his favorite son. Chris Bryant, a member of the Britain's opposition's Labour Party, one of their political parties, told the House of Commons on February 24th, the day the invasion began, that Abramovich shouldn't be allowed to own an English football club and should be banned from England. Here's a quick video on that to show some of the protests and things going on around Abramovich in Chelsea.
Russian businessman Roman Abramovich puts the Chelsea Football Club up for sale 19 years after buying it and setting the team on a path to glory. As the support tells us, the proceeds from the sale will be donated to the victims of the war in Ukraine.
As threats to sanction Russia's oligarchs intensify, Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich said he would sell Chelsea Football Club after 19 years, promising to donate money from the sale to help victims of the war in Ukraine. The metals magnate said in a statement Wednesday that a sale was in the best interest of the reigning European and world soccer champions. The announcement comes as Russian billionaires come under intensifying pressure. Earlier in the day, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson declined to comment on whether Britain would impose sanctions on Abramovich, but said the vice was tightening on those around Russian President Vladimir Putin. And in the U.S., Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced further efforts to sanction Russia's elite.
We and our allies and partners are launching a task force to identify, track down, and freeze the assets of sanctioned Russian companies and oligarchs. We will freeze and seize their yachts, their private jets, their opulent estates in world capitals.
Swiss business tycoon Hans-Jörg Weiss told a newspaper that he was considering buying Chelsea from Abramovich, saying Abramovich wanted to get rid of Chelsea quickly and was trying to sell his villas in England as well. Abramovich bought the West London club in 2003 for a reported £140 million, an investment that led to the most successful era in the team's history. The 55-year-old, who has Israeli and Portuguese citizenship, became one of Russia's most powerful businessmen by earning fortunes after the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. Forbes has put his net worth at $13.3 billion.
Now here's the latest list of companies cutting ties with Russia as Western sanctions bite. Software giant Oracle suspending all of its operations in Russia in response to a request by Ukraine's government for tech companies to shun Moscow. EA Games also posted a statement on Twitter saying it will remove Russian teams from FIFA soccer games. It adds EA Sports stands in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. Spotify shutting down its office in Russia indefinitely. It has also reviewed thousands of pieces of content since last week and restricted shows owned and operated by Russian state-affiliated media. Video streaming giant Netflix is also pausing all projects and acquisitions in Russia. And H&M, the world's second biggest fashion retailer, is temporarily suspending all sales in Russia.
Now, besides that, there's been other issues as well. You had F1 drivers being removed from their teams. There's an American team, Haas Racing, that fired a Russian driver. You also have being pulled out of all soccer tournaments, and they may miss this next World Cup. So there's a lot of sanctions going on to individuals who don't think it's fair, as they are Russian citizens, but they're not like Abramovich. Have no dealings with Putin. So on March 2nd, announcement came out that said that Abramovich will put Chelsea up for sale. He also stated at this time, due to the invasion and his close relationship with Putin, that would be in the best interest of the club, the employees, as well as the club sponsors and partners. Abramovich's 20-year stewardship of Chelsea has been a success on and off the field. He's put money in Chelsea's women's team, which is now one of the best in Europe. His youth academy has developed some of the top stars of the current men's team, including Mason Mount, as well as Reece James, who is pictured right here. Both of those gentlemen are also prominent on the English national team as well. Chelsea's charitable arm is also focused on combating anti-Semitism and racism due to Abramovich's Jewish ties. Before Abramovich took over Chelsea, like many other English football teams, Chelsea had a reputation for attracting racist fans, also known as hooligans, some of whom have booed the team's first black player, Paul Cannonville, in the 1980s. At the beginning of this season, Cannonville was honored by Abramovich and Chelsea with the opening of a suite in his name at the club stadium. Now going into the values of Chelsea, KPMG values the franchise at 1.9 billion euros or $2.1 billion. Now, potential Americans have thought about buying Chelsea, but their concern is about the additional risk they face in owning an asset in Europe compared to a relegated system in American sports. So what do I mean by that? In American sports, if you finish last and you're in the NFL, you just finish last. But in European sports, if you finish last or the bottom three teams, you go down to the next division. And the top three teams from the division that you went down to come up. So there's a system of relegation and promotion in most of these sports. American owners fear this because once you get relegated from, let's say, Major League Baseball to AAA, obviously it's less lucrative. You face not the top level competition, so the sponsors decrease, and it's hard to catch up with the teams that have the huge financial resources, such as Manchester City, Newcastle, and all the teams bought by billionaires. So with that being said, the next owner of Chelsea most likely will come from the European plane, as they're used to investing their money and have to invest second and tertiary rounds of money to keep the team afloat on the top level. So in closing, I'd like to have a few quick statements. Just like everything else in the world, politics overlaps sports just like society. Also, the company you keep can bite you, and that can be based on the stage and actions that they commit. By stage, meaning who sees it and what actions are they. Obviously, if one of your best friends is the president of Russia and he invades countries and he lets you pick his prime ministers and his cabinet, then there's an affiliation. So now you've lost your soccer club. So in the future, what can we learn from this? Basically, if you want to get into that level of politics, presidents and things like that, expect some type of backlash. Please apologize. I like to apologize for the audio or visual difficulties today. I'm working on my lighting. We have a big surprise at SportsZone Chicago. So I had it straight and something happened and it messed up. So I do apologize for the lighting issues today. But I do thank everyone for tuning in. Again, thank you so much for tuning in with me to this week's episode of Sports 101. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on social media, especially on Twitter at Coach_Harp412. Please get social with SportsZone Chicago and a litany of other shows by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. You will follow SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found on the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Again, thank you for tuning in with me with this news bulletin episode of Sports 101. I want to give you guys some content on the invasion and how it's affecting sports. I hope everyone enjoyed it and learned a little something about the history of Russia and Ukraine. I'll see you next week at our normal scheduled time, Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, and I'm gone.